Now we'll discuss about how to create a class in Java. So we'll see how to create it in Eclipse IDE. And inside a class, we have two major portions. We have variables and we have methods. So variables are meant for representing real-world attributes of a particular object, and methods are used to represent real-world operations of the corresponding object. So programmatically, we will make it as variables as well as the methods. And for variables, we have three different types. We have instance variable, static variable, and local variable. So we'll see how to create these variables inside the class and how we can able to access it. Then we'll move on to creating methods in Java, where we can create two types of methods, instance method and static methods. We will see how to create both the methods and how these methods are accessed in the class. Then we'll move on to working with constructors. So constructors allows you to create an object, or it allows you to initialize an object for the particular class. So we'll see how to create constructor inside a class and different ways of creating it and how we are invoking a constructor. So we'll see those things. Then we'll move on to creating an object. In the previous session, we discussed about how to create an object for the particular class. We discussed about syntaxes for creating an object, and we discussed about how we are invoking methods of the particular class. Then we'll move on to the usage of static keyword in Java as well as the usage of this keyword in Java. So to start with, I'm going to create a class student to represent a real world object. So I'm going to create a class name as a student, and for the student class, every student will have a name. So name is a real world attribute, and every student will have their own ID, and every student will have their own age. So here I have taken three separate variables to represent an attribute. So name, ID as well as the age, and I'm going to have a method display to show all the values of the instance variables. So here I'm going to print the values of name of the student I'm printing, and I'm going to print age of the student, and finally I'm going to print ID of the student. So inside my display method, I am trying to print all the values of the instance variables. So inside a class, we have declared three variables. So these variables are referred as instance variables, and these instance variables always have default values. So these things we discussed earlier. So for the given case, the default values for our class type is null, and for age the default value is 0. So it will always have a default values. And as part of display method, we have created this method inside of a class. So we call it as instance method, and the instance variable and instance method are always accessible through the object of the particular class. Now we will see how to access the instance variable and the display method. So here I'm going to create a main method. So either you can have a main method inside this student class, or you can create a separate test class where you can have a main method. So here I'm going to create a separate class to have a main method. So I'm going to call it as student test. So here I'm going to invoke all the properties of the student class, and here I'm going to have a main method, and I'm going to create an object for the class. So for creating object for the class, you should start with a class name. So student is a class name, and S1 is going to be an object name. Then I have to invoke a constructor to initialize an object. So here I have created an object reference S1, and new is a keyword, and student of is a constructor which allows you to initialize an object. Suppose if you want to create one more object for the same class, you can name it as S2, and still you can use the same constructor to invoke object. Likewise, for the given student class, you can invoke or you can create as much of objects you want. Now I'm going to invoke the display method. So s1 dot display. So we'll see what is the output for the given code. So here we are, for the name null is printed, and for age 0 got printed, and for the ID null gets printed. So name, age and student ID are going to be the instance variable, so it always have a default values. So it is got printed. Suppose if you want to access the variables for the particular class, then you can go with an object name. So for s1 age, I am assigning it as 18. For s1 dot id, it is of integer type. I have given it as 1 2 3 4. s1 dot name, it is of string type. So I'm going to assign I'm assigning 3 values for the given attributes, and once again I am trying to print the display method. So we'll run the code. So it is of default values after invoking the constructor, and I have assigned a name, age and ID. So these got printed after invoking display method. Right. Now we will see how to include a static variable over here. Suppose for creating static variable, you have to use a keyword static. So static int, I'm going to have a student count as a variable name. So student count is a variable name I have created. So student count, I am declaring it as of static type. So inside my test class, I am going to assign some number for the student count. So here I am assigning student count as 100. Right. Now we will try to print student count also. So I am modifying the display method. Here I am going to add student count. Now we will run the same code and we'll look at the output. So now the student count is 100, it is getting printed. The basic difference with instance variable and static variable is static variables belongs to class. You can able to access the static variables with the help of a class name. For example, instead representing s1 dot student count, you can represent it like student dot student count. So it is always recommended that static variables should be accessed with the help of a class name. And moreover, the speciality of static variable here is static variables are shared by all the object. So this is the speciality of a static variable. And moreover, only once memory will be allocated. So for throughout the class, only one time memory will be allocated for the static variable. So these are all certain specialities about static. It always belongs to the class, and the static variables are being shared by all the objects, and it is memory will be allocated only once throughout the program. So for example, here we are assigning the student count as 100, and for the given student class we have two objects, right? So we will see the actual value of student count in both the objects. For example, if I am trying to print s1 dot student count, and once again I am trying to print s2 dot student count. Now we'll run the code, we'll look at the output. So if you look at the output, both the objects are sharing the same value, right? So that is the specialty of a static variable. So even if you have n number of objects, all the objects will have the same value. It means that static variables are being shared by all the objects. So we started with creating class in Java and creating different types of variable, and we discussed about how to create instance variable, how to create static variables, and how we are accessing it inside the class. Now we'll have a discussion about methods. So regarding methods, we discussed about how we are creating instance method. Suppose if you want to have a static method, we will see how to create a static method. So you simply attach a keyword static with a method signature. So I'm creating another display method for displaying the count. So here I'm going to print the student count. So inside the display count method, I'm simply printing the value of student count. And for accessing this method, you can go with a class name. So class name dot method name. So this is how we should access the static method inside a class. And for accessing static variable, you should go with class name dot static variable name. And for accessing static method, we go with class name dot method name. Now we will look at the output. So once again 100 got printed because of display count method. And the important thing you should remember regarding static method is, so static method only access static variable or local variable. You cannot access non-static members inside your static variable. For example, inside the static method, if you try to print some other values, for example, if I am trying to print name, so name is of instance variable type, it is non-static variable. So in this line you will get a compile time error. If you look at the error, you cannot make a static reference to the non-static field name. So this statement is entirely wrong, because inside the static method you should not access non-static properties. So regarding static method, you should remember this. So now we discussed about both instance method and static methods. Now we'll move on to working with the constructors. So for demonstrating this, I'm going to have a new class. I'm naming it as employee, and every employee will have their name, and every employee will have their ID. So I have created two instance variable for the employee. Now I am going to have a constructor. So before getting to constructor, you should have basic understanding what is constructor, what is the usage of it. So constructor is a special type of method. So it is of a special type, This is special type of method does not have return type, so the constructor does not have any return type, and the name of the constructor is always the name of the class name. So name of the uh, constructor is same as the class name, and it may have a constructors, either it may have an argument constructor. So constructor may have argument or no arguments. So these are all the basic ideas. Now inside this employee class, I'm going to create a constructor. So the name of the constructor should be same as the class name. So I have given the constructor name as employee. So probably inside the constructor we will always try to initialize the instance variable. So this is going to be the actual logic of the constructor. So for the name, I can initialize with some value. So I'm giving it as Arul, and for ID you can have some value C123. So likewise, we will always initialize the instance variable inside the constructor. So in this constructor we have no arguments, so we call it as default constructor. And if you want, you can also have a parameters constructor. That is also, you can have a number of parameters. So I'm going to have another constructor which takes only one argument. So here I'm going to take e name. So I'm going to pass an employee name, and whatever the name I am passing, I have to assign it with instance variable name. So in parameters constructor, what we do here is we simply assign argument into instance variable. So this is how the logic we write inside the parameters constructor. So whatever the values comes inside the argument, we will assign it into your instance variable. Now we will see how to invoke both the constructor. So for doing that, I'm going to have one more class, that is of employee test. So I have an employee test. Inside the employee test, I am going to have a main method. So inside the main method, I am going to create an object for the employee class. So in the first case, I am going to use the default constructor, and I am going to have one more object, e2, by invoking a parameters constructor. So in case of parameters constructor, while invoking it, you have to pass the name. So now we have created two objects, one object with the help of a default constructor, another object with the help of a parameters constructor. Now we will try to print the values. So we'll try to print ID of the first object, and I'm trying to print name of the first object. Likewise, I'm going to print name and ID of the second object. So second object reference name is E2. Now we will see what is the output. So for the first object reference E1, we have assigned ID and name inside your default constructor as C123 and Arun. So these two values are assigned with an instance variable, and both the values got printed. And for the second parameters constructor, we are only assigning the name. We haven't assigned anything for the ID. So the default value for the ID is null. So null got printed. And this is the name we have passed over here, that is being assigned with an instance variable name. So this is how constructors can be created inside the class. And moreover, whenever we create a class in Java, every class should have a constructor. So this is a background idea in Java. Whenever you create a class in Java, that class will definitely have a constructor. So if you take the employee class, we have two constructors, right? But if you look at the employee test class, we haven't created any constructor at all, right? Now, but what I have given a statement about constructor here is every class should have a constructor. But in employee test class, we haven't created any constructor. Now what will happen here is your compiler add a default constructor during compilation when there is no constructor inside a class. So this is a idea you should remember. So you are compiling a class and your compiler checks that there is a constructor or not in a particular class, and when there is no constructor inside a class, then the compiler will add a default constructor. So in Java programming, every class will always have a constructor. Okay, that's about the constructor. And so constructors can be invoked only when an object is created. So you cannot invoke constructor like other methods. Constructors are being invoked only we create an object for the particular class. So these are all the things you should remember about the constructor. Then we discussed about how to create an object and how we are invoking a method. We discussed about invoking instance method and invoking a parameterized method. Now we'll get into the usage of static keyword. So in our previous session, we used a static keyword in different way. So we used a static keyword for creating static variable, and you can create static method. Apart from that, you can also create a static block. So you all know how to create a static variable and how to create a static method, and now we will see how to create a static block. So inside my employee test class, I have only a main method, and inside this I'm going to add a static block. So if you want to create a static block in Java, you simply use a keyword static with open and closed curly brace, and static block can be inserted anywhere inside your class. And here I am printing it is static block 1, and inside this static block I am going to print block 2. So here we have created two static blocks. Now we are going to run the same program with static. So we'll look at the output. So from the output you can understand that static blocks are always executed first inside your class, and moreover we have two static blocks, and the static blocks are being executed in the order of their presence. So block 1 is there in the first, and block 2 is available in the last section. So first this first static block is executed, then the second static block is executed, then your main method is being executed. So this is the order of execution whenever you have static block inside your class. So static blocks are executed first inside a class, and static blocks are executed in the order of its presence. It means that the first static block will be executed first, and the second static block will be executed second. And like static method, static blocks cannot access non-static members. It means that static blocks are allowed to execute or allowed to access only non-static members. You cannot try to access anything non-static. It will raise a compile time error. So these are all the things you should remember regarding static block. Now we'll come back to this keyword. So in Java programming, we have two major usage of this keyword. While working with a constructor, for example, in the employee class, we have a parameterized constructor. Here the parameter name is ename and the instance variable name is name, right? What happens when the parameter name and instance variable name are same, right? So if the name is same, whatever the value you are assigning over here will not be reflected in the instance variable name, right? So in that case, for differentiating instance variable with argument variable, we use this keyword. So in the left side section, the start name represents your instance variable, and the right side section name represents your argument. So with the help of this keyword, you can differentiate. You can able to differentiate instance variable from argument or parameter variable. So this is a major usage of this keyword. Apart from that, you can also invoke constructor of the same class. Suppose if you want to invoke a constructor of the same class, you can go with this keyword. So we will see how to use it. How we are going to invoke the constructor with the help of this keyword. For example, here I have a parameterized constructor, no argument constructor. So with the help of this keyword, you can able to invoke constructor. Suppose from the no argument constructor, if you want to invoke parameterized constructor, in that case I can write something like, so what we are doing here is this of a string as an argument we are passing. So this will invoke the corresponding parameterized constructor of the same class. So this constructor accepts a string. So this statement will invoke the parameterized constructor. So you can invoke like that. Otherwise, suppose from the parameterized constructor, if you want to invoke default constructor, you can add a statement like that, this of. So this will invoke no argument constructor of the same class. So likewise, this keyword can be used to invoke constructors of the same class. And so this of statement should be the, so there is a restriction for while invoking constructor. So the this of statement should be the first line inside a constructor. you cannot add anywhere else in the program. So this can be added inside the constructor and in the very first line. So this is a restriction for using this keyword for invoking a constructor of the same class. So far we started with creating class in Java. So we discussed about creating a student class and creating an employee class. Then we'll move on to creating different types of variables inside a class. We discussed how to create instance variable, and we discussed how to create static variables and how we are accessing both the variables with the help of an object. Then we discussed about how to create instance method and static method, and how we are accessing instance and static. Suppose if the method is of type instance, then you can able to invoke it with the help of an object. Suppose if the method is of type static, you can able to invoke it with the help of a class. You don't need an object for invoking static method. Then we'll discuss about constructor. So constructor is a special type of method which allows you to create or initialize an object, and constructor may have a parameter or it may not have a parameter. And in Java, every class should have the constructor, and during the compilation, if there is no constructor inside a class, then the compiler will add a default constructor inside the class. And later we discussed about how to create an object and how to access the instance method and static method. Then we'll discuss about the usage of static keyword. So there are three major usage of static keyword. You can have a static variable, you can have a static method, then you can have a static blocks. And we discussed how to create a static block and how static blocks are being executed in Java. Then we'll move on to how to create how to use this keyword. So there are two major usage of this keyword. Either you can use this keyword to differentiate instance variable with parameter name, and you can use this keyword for invoking constructors of the same class.